So Patrick, it's in the shadow of the statue to your father that I get to see you today. And it sounds like your family has a pretty long history in this community. So let me ask you, what do you feel about the race that's evolving in your country right now?
You know, it's different than I've seen any race since I've been observing since 1984 when I first started with the newspaper. I'm sure it's different than what my father saw. You know, it's been hard to predict. The Republican Party has had these strange twists and turns in it. You know, I guess it shows some of the frustration that's in this country and also some of the racism that's still in this country.
Let's talk about that piece of it as we sit in a community that's really about the immigrant experience in the United States. Cubans have built this neighborhood in particular. How is the Cuban community, if I can say that, reacted to the discussion around immigration, around racism, around a level of intolerance that I'm not sure we've heard in a while?
Well, the Cuban community is a tough one to peg down. You have Cubans who got here before 1959. A lot of them are Democrat. A lot of them are immigrated here because they wanted to. Then you have the Cubans who came over in '59 through the early '60s. They came over because they needed to, and they're all Republican. And then you have Cubans who've come over more recently, and they still have a lot of family over there, and they'd like change to happen, but they're very non-political. You know, when you're talking about Florida, you're not just talking about a Cuban vote. If we were further south down in Miami, Cuban politics dominates. Up in this area, Central Florida, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, Cubans, Venezuelans, Guatemalans, you have a whole mix here. And so that one group doesn't quite dominate. But in the Republican primary, the Hispanic group that does get mostly involved is Cubans. And, you know, I'm hearing a mixed bag from them. You know, Cubans don't have the immigration problem the rest of Hispanics do. Their wet foot, dry foot policy allows them to immediately qualify for benefits, immediately qualify for Social Security and a whole bunch of other things, path to citizenship, the second they touch here. So their issues with immigration are quite different.
But do they worry that they will be kind of sucked into this vortex of conversation around immigration, where you hear Trump in particular saying, I don't want Muslims who don't already live here coming in. I want to build, you know, a wall that seems to get higher every time he talks about it between the U.S. and Mexico. Do Cubans who haven't really thought of themselves as being part of that experience feel like they could be pulled into it?
I think some do, but I think that a lot of the Cuban Republicans also might be prejudicial towards Mexicans. They might also be prejudicial towards other Hispanic groups. So a lot of times, you know, it's not us they're talking about is some of what you hear back. So therefore, we're okay with that kind of discussion. It's not them until all of a sudden it starts to affect them. And you know, until you're affected by racism, you know, you kind of ignore that it's your problem. So I'm starting to see, I see some of that, but I see Trump making inroads in the Cuban community, which is a real problem for Rubio come election night. Rubio needed to win. The Hispanic Cuban Americans, the Republicans, you know, he needed to win them by 80, 90%. He needed to do what Hillary did in South Carolina with black women. And I just don't see that. I see a lot of Cubans being attracted to Donald Trump's wealth. A lot of the Cuban community, especially that 1959-96 group, is a very wealthy group of people, and they're motivated by that American experience. And I think Trump kind of embodies that for them. And I think you're going to see Trump eat into a lot of that vote for Rubio.
Let's talk about Rubio for a moment, because most people, if they were sitting there assessing their own campaign, would think they could take their home state for granted, frankly. Why has he not been able to do that? Why is it, you know, seemingly based on the polls, he's not going to win Florida?
You know, Rubio came in with a Tea Party tide, and he didn't win a majority of Florida. He had three candidates in the race. Had the Democrat not run, perhaps Charlie Crist would have run. Had Charlie Crist not run, perhaps the Democrat could have run. But we had an independent in that race who took a lot of votes. And so Rubio never has won a majority of this state, and in that case it was also a pretty small vote at the same time. So not that many people in the state have actually voted for our senator. And Rubio's been remaking himself constantly. The Rubio that got elected as state house in a district that was 70–80% Hispanic is not the Rubio who ran for state senate, and that's not the Rubio who's run for president of the United States.
The knock against him is that the second he got to Washington, he started campaigning for this job and forgot about the one that got him there.
That, and also, here's a guy who, because he was Hispanic, got his first job in elected politics, and then immediately forgot about that. I mean, this is a guy who's for English as the official language. He's a guy who voted against a Hispanic, would have voted against a Hispanic Supreme Court justice. He's been the anti-Hispanic Hispanic. We felt that way a long time ago, and in fact, for about a year, I only referred to him as Mark Rubb, taking the vowels off the end of his name to eliminate his Hispanicness.
Very quickly, I want to touch on the Democratic race. I mean, it's interesting how much airtime and conversation the Republican race has sucked out of the entire thing, but the
Right.
Democrats are obviously trying to figure out who they want to put forward too. Any issue in your mind about who's going to take Florida?
It looks like it's Hillary. I mean, that's everything I see. Bernie Sanders people are working hard. I think the problem that Bernie has is when it comes into states like Florida, where you have a lot of black and Hispanics, he just has not had any rapport with them, and coming in at the last minute and saying, hey, I'm for you guys, doesn't quite work.
Which is interesting because if you look at his personal history, he was there in those civil disobedience riots of the 60s and 70s alongside black activists. So
Right.
Why does he have a hard time leveraging that politically?
I guess, he hasn't been in the black churches for the last 5 or 6 years. He hasn't been to Hispanic rallies and events and things like that. The community really demands that you reach out and touch them, shake their hands, see them in their churches. And because of the part of the country that he was in, he just didn't have a lot of that.
As much as there's all this conversation right now about these races, I wonder about the conversation taking place in the Cuban community about the fact that President Obama is in fact going to Cuba next week. That in itself a historic moment for any American president of the last 50, 60 years.
It's huge. And I think that what it's doing is it's taking the issue of Cuba out of presidential politics, because I think most Cubans realize the embargo's over with. You stick a fork in it, it's done. You might be able to slow it down, but the end result is that we're going to normalize relations with Cuba. And I think that it's going to change Cuban politics in Florida overnight once he gets there. And so I see some Cubans who want to see this change. I see some who are somewhat resistant to it. It's a very personal decision amongst them, but I think what it's going to do is it's going to eliminate this fight.
Last question. When this American presidential race is over, in your view, is this country going to be better off or worse off?
I guess that depends on who we elect.
What's your gut telling you?
My gut is that America has more people who have common sense and who are rational and reasonable, and that in a presidential election with a 60–70% turnout, that group will come to bear. And if it's Trump versus Hillary, which is what it appears to be, that Hillary Clinton will be our next president.
Patrick, thanks for your time.
Thank you.